The idea of modeling agricultural biological systems that we see in nature is just absurd to me.
One, two, three.
Coming up, we're talking to the co-founder and CEO of Agrology, which is a tool for measuring regenerative farming outcomes.
Ty, we're recording this on Monday night. We're both looking a little worse for wear. We made it through a pretty brutal workout over the weekend. Let's chat about it.
All right, so got Murph done. What a fun tradition. I feel like this year more than years past. I'm just like so into the tradition of it, and I can't let a year go by and not do Murph, and was pumped to do it this year. And yeah, Tim, it was brutal. This is the first year I've done it where I wore a vest, and oh man, I was hurting. That last mile at the end, your legs are jello, and I was just like limping along. But overall, I beat my target time and was happy with it.
Nice. I knocked it out on Saturday. We had a barbecue today, so I knew I wasn't going to be able to get it in the morning, trying to get ready for that, but knocked it out. Had the girls in the garage trying to like feed snacks, get the iPad rolling to try to get this workout in, so had a few distractions, but made it through with the vest as well.
Yeah, you were struggling with the very young kids. My daughters were just like cheering along the whole time, so that was they let me lock in and get it done.
Nice.
Hope everyone enjoyed the Memorial Day and a chance to remember all of the veterans who gave their life and sacrifice for our country. Great holiday to remember that. Tim, excited to jump into this episode. We're talking to CEO and co-founder of Agrology. They are building tools and sensors to measure regenerative ag outcomes. This is so important in this space. We talk about it all the time, Tim, right? Like regenerative is dumbed down. It doesn't mean anything. Well, companies like Agrology are the ones that are trying to make it mean something and try to make the outcomes clear to people. So it was awesome to chat through with Adam, the founding story, where they're headed. And I loved some of his hot takes at the end about the industry were spot on.
It's a great conversation. We'll drop you in with what's top of mind for Adam. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Hey guys, quick message from our sponsor, PF Partners. Growing your business in the agriculture space in 2025 is maybe harder than it's ever been. Investor funding has dried up, growers have tighter budgets than ever, and overall, it's just hard to go to market. PF Partners, a consulting firm with over a decade of experience scaling successful ad tech solutions globally, has just launched a new webinar on optimizing go-to-market strategies in the agribusiness space. It shows you what's changing in the market, exactly how to deal with it. Everything is backed by research, and it's about go-to-market plays in the ag sector that you can use tomorrow. So if you're ready to turn your go-to-market efforts into results, go to themodernacre.com/PFP or text modern to 55444 to download the webinar for free. That's themodernacre.com/PFP or text modern to 55444.
Yeah, I think top of mind for me, it's hard to avoid it, is just the economic situation we're in. And, at Agrology, we try and be very apolitical. We're super focused on creating soil health, helping farming stay economically viable, implementing regenerative agriculture, and all of that. But I remember hearing people talk about uncertainty in business before I was running a company, and you kind of heard that at the time. You're like, oh, whatever, sure, uncertainty, it's hard. And now that I'm actually in the kind of pilot seat here, it's impossible to make plans with uncertainty. Like it's so hard. We're trying to figure out our supply chains for our next products. And how do you pick a place to source from when you don't know if the tariff's going to be 0 or like 150%? It's near impossible. So that it's hard to get that out of my mind. It's funny to be checking the news every day to see, like, have tariffs shifted? What is that going to mean for my literal next order of products? It's it's super complicated. Like a lot of companies, we have a global supply chain. Our products designed and largely manufactured in the United States, but there's a lot of components from elsewhere, and it's tough, man. It's just I didn't see this coming.
Totally. And I think that's like important nuance that a lot of people don't understand is you could have a made in the USA product, but a ton of components be made overseas. And some of those for good reasons, some of those maybe not so for as good of reasons, right? But needless to say, it's affecting companies that are manufacturing in the USA. If that's an important thing we're trying to do here with these tariffs.
Yeah, especially I'll say if you have any kind of product with any component of technology fully made in America to those standards is near impossible. And I have one product I can think of right now. It's a winch, and it's like 100% made in America. And I've taken it apart and rebuilt it and seen all the labels on everything from the motor to the clutch. Like they stamped out that steel in the Midwest and put it together, and that's awesome. But our products include sensors manufactured all over the place with intellectual property from all over the place, and there's not a way around it. There's no way to make what we have and deliver the value that our American farming customers want with a fully domestic supply chain. And some of that I think is actually it's great to be working with Canada. We're excited to have Canadian customers. We're excited to source Canadian components. That's excellent. Other things a little more challenging, but there's not a way to deliver what we're doing, even if money was no object and we didn't care about, keeping our products affordable. You just can't do it without working, without importing some stuff.
I'm excited to get into your products and your solution at Agrology, but let's learn a little bit more about you, Adam. I saw on your bio that you have 48 granted patents and 69 applications under prosecution. That is 48 more patents than Tim and I have. Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background in companies, and what ultimately led you to Agrology.
Yeah. So my background, I grew up in the city of San Francisco, a place that loves to eat food but doesn't grow too much of it. And I was lucky growing up to have, and I still have, godparents in Sonoma County, north of the city there. And I go up there a ton. They have an apple orchard. And so that's what got me interested in agriculture, was helping them cultivate and harvest and then process all their apples into apple cider. And I helped them scale up from, making a small amount of cider for friends and family to being able to sell at farmers markets, which was super fun. It's so much fun that I now live on the East Coast and I have a small number of apple trees and I still make cider every year. The difference, I joke, is that now I make hard cider and not just, kid cider, but I have to make just enough kid cider to keep my kids as part of the workforce because they will not work to watch me drink the hard cider. They're gonna insist on having some of their own, but it's a lot of fun. It helps us stay connected to the land, helps them understand, where food comes from on a small scale. And, it's really fun also to see how the quality of what we do there, because we're growing in a very different climate than California, how it changes year to year. Like you can really taste the outcome, even in the unfermented stuff the kids drink, you can really taste the year to year. So that's the background. I really enjoy that connection to agriculture. And I studied mechanical engineering in college, did a thesis on agricultural technology, and then didn't work in the sector for a while. I worked in renewable energy, and then in banking innovation, where I met my co-founders at Agrology. We're all working on secure payment and transaction identity technologies for banking, completely unrelated to agriculture. But the company they canceled our project abruptly, and we wanted to keep working together on something very different. And they realized that they were good at embedded systems, machine learning, a bunch of stuff that I didn't know very well. And I had some agricultural background. We could go off in this direction and start Agrology. So I have to take a second to acknowledge that the National Science Foundation gave us a small business innovative research grant that got us going and let us build the kind of core technology that we're still running today. And so, those patents I have, it's a lot of fun getting those. Good number of those is from my time with my co-founders at Capital One. Some of them are separate and some of them are for Agrology, but we've had a lot of fun creating what we have today and figuring out how to do new things to help farmers with some of these challenges around soil health and carbon intensity that they're facing.
That's awesome. Well, let's dig in here to kind of the founding story. Like maybe talk to us about kind of the early days of the company, what the platform looked like, and the pivots along the way.
Yeah. So the earliest days of the company was me and Kevin and Tyler, the other founders, like going into polytunnels, high tunnels, and testing stuff out. And in the summer, just getting so hot and sweaty in the winter, being so happy that we were inside those tunnels where it's warmer, and really starting to play around with and seeing, can we solve irrigation challenges? Can we solve pest and disease challenges? What are the things that, the farmers we were talking to need help with? We spent some time in those high tunnels. We'd also got to California a fair amount, to head to the Central Valley, head to wine country, go places in specialty crops where we knew that a lot of ag tech focus wasn't really helping with the challenges, because a lot of ag tech focuses on broadacre commodities. And we got a product launch there that helped our customers with drought pressures, heat domes, some of those challenges seen in California. And we quickly added in wildfire smoke, because our wine grape customers were having a lot of trouble with that at the time. And that actually got us on the path to the product we have today. We got into this role of kind of measuring gases in environmental areas. And our customers said, look, we really like seeing these threats, but we'd love it if you could help us understand our soil health in real time. And if you could do that, in a way where we don't have to take tests, we don't have to send stuff to labs, we get real time feedback. And we knew that after talking to them, we could take, the expertise we built up in gas monitoring, which is a pretty niche scientific field, and maybe take some techniques that existed in soil science and bring them out of the lab and into the hands of farmers, so they could see their soil health in real time and kind of close the loop on how cultivation activities and the inputs they were using were driving soil health outcomes.
So walk us through kind of the first steps to help scale the company. Like it's a grand ambition. It's a big challenge. Like how did you take your first steps?
Sure. So the first steps, it's actually kind of funny. I had torn my ACL, and I had a few months of sitting around. And so I did a lot of paperwork, and that paperwork got us eligible for that NSF SBIR grant program to let us go and build the deep technology that we're still deploying to our customers today. And there's a lot of work that goes into starting a company like that no one tells you about. Just a lot of paperwork, extra when you're going to go and apply for, innovation grants that are government backed. But the exciting thing is we won that, and that got us started. And that program also really pushed us to talk to a lot of farmers and trial and make sure that we were building something that our customers actually needed. And so, once we received that funding, we did a number of deployments of prototypes out in Maryland, Virginia, California, to start spinning up our systems and seeing how they worked. And then it was kind of iterative improvements. We have some hardware that goes in the field. We have our software server side, machine learning. We have user interfaces. And we had to tweak all that till we could get answers to customers. And the other thing that was really important was listening to those customers and responding. And so that's what led us in the direction of measuring soil health in real time. And we figured out a way to get a prototype into our customers' hands. And it looked pretty good, and they were excited. And then we kind of put out some press around it saying, hey, we have this new capability. And the demand was pretty overwhelming for that. So we saw a ton of interest come in. And pretty quickly, we realized, we'd shifted from being a climate threat company looking at drought and heat dome to a soil health company, because that's what was selling and that's what our customers wanted. So it was an interesting process. I think a lot of companies go through a pivot where they change, their product or their business. I think a lot of the time it's kind of a hair-raising process, because you have to make a big choice about what you're going to do next. And you don't know. For us, it happened kind of naturally and organically overnight. I remember one day I was just talking with Tyler, and I'm like, wow, look at this. We're a soil health company now. Like we're 100% in that area. And we've, continued to invest in that direction. And it's been great, because it's a area where we have a really, differentiated product, unique capabilities. But we're still working with a lot of the same type of growers that we started with. So that's been fascinating. As we changed our product, we've kept almost all our customers, because we're providing some really great insights they can't get anywhere else.
Adam, can you dig into kind of the funding and structure a little bit more? You mentioned like grants early on to get going. I think your structure as a public benefit corporation is quite unique. Don't come across that quite a bit in ag tech. So maybe just talk to us about your thoughts about fundraising, the role of venture capital, and kind of how you're currently structured.
Yeah, so I think the funding that we got initially that made this possible was non-dilutive grant funding. And, another thing that's kind of top of mind for me, a lot of those programs are under attack right now for being quote unquote inefficient, which first of all, I find troubling, because the people doing the attacking have benefited a lot from government incentive programs. Like Tesla was built with giant loans from the federal government for factories, and now they're clawing up those programs that are going to allow other entrepreneurs to start. And that's alarming. And the amount of research that the government supports, it's important. Like a lot of the stuff that we rely on every day started out with government research. And, we created a lot of jobs with it. So I think that's important to highlight too. We got that SBIR funding, which let us do the technology research and development that no one wants to fund in the private sector to get our product off the ground. And that was a critical kind of year period. We got going. We got the product launched in late 2019, early 2020. We were super excited. COVID hit and kind of messed up everything else. And we realized we're going to have to reevaluate how we were going to grow the company. So we ran lean for a while just on those government grant programs we had. And then once we had some revenue, we went out and started talking to venture capitalists. And that really was the money we took in to grow and drive commercial outcomes, as opposed to doing the research and development phase of getting our product into the first place in market. And I think that's, I'd encourage people who are doing small business development definitely to look at what programs may be available to support that in a non-dilutive way. VC money is great if you can get it, but it can be very hard to get it. And it comes with a lot of responsibilities that I've learned around delivering growth and outcome and, a whole lot of paperwork and reporting. And not that there's not paperwork from these non-dilutive programs, but, there's going to be a little more breathing room and time to perfect your product before you have to get onto that growth focused mentality of running a business. Agrology is a public benefit corporation. And we did that particularly because we'd seen in the ag tech world some challenges around how a number of companies, they were not guaranteeing that they were going to protect and be good stewards of farmer data. They would say, we'd see there's a lot of incentive to sell a product to the farmers, but then take their data and monetize it in other ways that cannot be beneficial. So you could take yield data from farmers, but then also sell that yield data to land managers or landowners who can then raise leases on farmers, an example of a kind of misaligned incentive structure. And we really wanted to make sure we weren't doing that. And so the public benefit corporation just requires, as part of our incorporation documents, that we have a mission and that, that needs to be acknowledged beyond just making profits. And so that keeps, investors from saying, find new ways to monetize your data, sell it to aggregators, sell it to crop insurers, anything like that. It requires us to consider the benefits of farmers in the decisions we make. And we did that to make sure that we would always stay properly aligned to our core customers who we set out to try and help. And so that's actually a great transition to the way our product works, because our product fundamentally is the data our systems produce. That's what our customers own. And we know we set it up that way because our customers, they weren't looking to take on a whole bunch of CapEx around new equipment. They weren't looking to operate these, relatively complex systems. We are offering capabilities that, typically you need $100,000 in a PhD to acquire. And we didn't want to have our customers have any kind of that, overhead and capital expenditure education. So we put together our offering as a subscription, technology subscription. So you subscribe to it. It includes access to the software. It includes access to the hardware. And what you own, the outcome of it is you own the data it produces. And that's really what the value is. And that's what our customers want.
Adam, maybe just talk us through a customer example of kind of how they've partnered with Agrology, what insights they're getting, how they're changing their practices and implementation on farm.
Absolutely. So I'll lead off with Justin Wiley. He's a Central Valley farmer. And he's a particularly interesting customer because he's doing a lot of regenerative work. He does some consulting work in addition to owning acres. And the challenge he's found is that he has a lot of customers interested in regenerative agriculture, but they're farming in a region with heavily degraded soils. And so a lot of what Justin's looking to do is to bring in the right biological inputs that can really help improve soil health quickly. But the problem is those inputs, they require reasonable quality in the soil for them to kind of take hold and thrive. And before us, he'd have to go and he'd have to just apply kind of in hope and see if there's outcomes. With Agrology, he can do tests on new soils. You can apply a little bit of inoculant on maybe a couple dozen square feet of farmland and see is this inoculant? Is it having the desired effect? Is it improving soil health? Are we seeing increases of respiration that shows it's happening? Or is it dying off because the soil is overly compacted or salted up and you need to do a more remediation before you can even kind of start on that regenerative journey? And I think that example is really critical to what a lot of our customers are doing. Regenerative agriculture in general it's really empowering because it's about outcomes, not about just practice subscriptions. But the problem is, how do you, as a farmer or a land manager, know what to do on your land? Like you can look at recommendations, but even if you know something's going to be good, like you want to do a lot of biochar, what's the right amount? What's the cost benefit? Is there a biological solution that could be cheaper and easier to implement? And we help farmers experiment and get data from their actual land to make data-based decisions in their regenerative journey. And that's something that really didn't exist before, to have fast feedback like that, to see every day, every few minutes, how your soil health is looking. And that's, I think, the most important thing we're helping our customers with, because without that data to make those decisions, to have that certainty, it's really hard to take kind of a leap of faith in the regenerative direction.
You kind of need this data, this framework to be able, as a baseline, to be able to see what's working and what's not. That's kind of the idea, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the challenge is with a lot of other improvements and advances we see in agriculture, the effects are happening above the ground. Like you'll see a healthier crop, you'll see a yield increase, you'll see less water stress, less heat damage, something like that you can walk around and scout visually. And that's always going to be the best way to do anything. It's just, if you can walk through the orchard, you can walk the field and you can see what's going on, that's great. But for soil health, it's happening underground. Like there really isn't a way to see it. And a lot of the benefits come with time. It can be a few years before you've increased your soil organic carbon, your soil organic matter enough to increase your soil's water holding capacity, to build in drought and heat dome resilience. And so without steady feedback early on, how are you going to see that? How are you going to connect practice changes to outcomes without, high quality ground truth data? And especially if you're just relying on laboratory tests, how are you going to do that, in a time efficient way? What I like to joke about is our product is kind of like having a fitness device that gives you blood pressure feedback every single day. Like that's really useful. It lets you understand, here's how exercise is affecting me. I was driving in traffic and my blood pressure's up. Maybe I'll try and minimize that. If you just go to the doctor once a year and get your blood pressure read, like that's helpful to see a trend over time, but you have no idea what you're doing that's causing changes year to year. You can't tell if it's a diet. You can't tell if it's lifestyle. You can't tell if it's stress. And it's really hard to make changes off of that. So we like to think of ourselves as, like a wearable fitness device for that soil health. It's going to provide you the continuous feedback that lets you really learn how to optimize the outcomes.
Adam, how do you think about this in the context of just all the different variation of crop types, like regen? Obviously, like a lot happening in the Midwest with kind of like monocrop agriculture of corn and beans, where you have one or two crops in a rotation. Then you get into kind of like permanent crops, so whether it's a vineyard or almond orchard. And then I think even more challenging, another puzzle to solve is kind of like annual rotational vegetables. I know you've worked with Bragafesh and Salinas that has a bunch of different rotations. Like on our farm, we grow 10 different crops and we're cycling every field that's going into a different crop. And so how do you think about kind of tracking this over time when you have a crop changing every year?
Yeah, I think it's tough. And we started off, our first crop was wine grapes, and that's a fun crop because you get to go to wine tasting, and the customers pour for you, which I still love, of course, and who wouldn't. But one thing that's been a challenge for us, frankly, is that we're now operating on basically every type of agricultural system in the United States. We're operating on, specialty crops from wine grapes to vegetables, everything in between. We're operating on all of the commodity crops. We're operating even on pasture land. And so that's because everywhere stuff is getting grown in soil, and we're looking at that. And so fundamentally, we have a little bit of advantage that all this stuff is getting grown in soil, and better soil health means better outcomes. And so we can translate lessons across that. In general, we know that, cover cropping is a really good strategy to drive soil health. And that can be applicable broadly. The nuance comes in when you start looking at what cover crop to use for your systems. It turns out there's very different answers for cover cropping, in wine country, up in Napa Sonoma versus the Central Coast. And even the Central Coast with microclimates, you might need different cover crop mixtures. our customers are doing those tests. And one thing that's great is, we're there to help them set up those trials to get answers. And so we're seeing that across our customer base, that for us, we can't provide the answers initially on what they should do. What we can do is we can help them set up really good trials. We can say, all right, do a control, have a couple of tests, measure the outcomes, and we'll help you interpret that data. And, I like to think about it as, we're helping, farmers are some of the most scientifically minded people I've encountered because they're constantly running tests in the real world and looking at outcomes. We're just helping them do that in a way with a little bit more data they couldn't gather before. And so if if it's cover cropping in wine grapes, or if it's rotational grazing in pasture land, or if it's low carbon intensity fertilizers in corn, we found ways to help our customers set up trials for all of those things and get quality data on the outcomes.
Adam, maybe tell us, how are things going, right? I mean, you've been at this for a few years.
Yep.
The past few years have been challenging from an investment perspective, some macroeconomic headwinds. Now, not only do we have that, we have a lot of changes going on with the administration, tariffs, MAHA, and also the farm economy is not going great, right?
Yeah.
So when I think about solutions like this, is this one of the concerns with growers of this is, in order of priority of spend, this is one of the things that comes first. Tell us how things are going now.
Yeah, and I think the challenge is that we've seen real steady interest in our business. And what I think changes is the size of the engagements we get to do with our customers. So, under the previous administration's horribly named Climate Smart Commodities program, there was large amounts of incentive coming into agriculture to do trials with new growing techniques, which was a lot of fun. We tried to compete for a lot of that money and didn't get it for reasons that still confuse me. And that's, I think, the frustrating thing with government is you just don't get answers on stuff sometimes. And so, that was great. But at the same time, the administration changed, and those contracts, even the awarded ones, are all on pause now. And so I'm almost kind of grateful we didn't have all of our revenue dependent on that, because we would be in a tough place then. And so what we're seeing is, our commercial customers, which is almost entirely our business, they might be pulling back a little bit on the scale of the engagement, but they still are really interested in getting data on their trials. And it comes from the fact that they know they need to make changes to agriculture. In California, no matter where your political leanings are, you're planning for a future with less water and more heat. And if your farmland is an asset, how do you make that asset have some longevity, especially for perennial crop growers, people with orchards and vineyards? Those are assets that can be 25, 50, 75 years, and you want that to keep producing. Some of those assets, especially in the vineyard area, they get more valuable with age, but you need them to be viable. You need them to be able to produce a crop even in a hot, dry year. And regenerative agriculture is a really good way to improve the value of that asset. So you're going to keep on investing in that, even in a tough economic climate, but being efficient, making database decisions becomes even more important. So what we see is our customers might be scaling back the size of their trials a bit, but they're still going forward with it. And our customers who have been with us for a while are still expanding. I think the change is, we'd like them to expand faster. We'd like to help them grow their regenerative trials to more land and be able to give them more data on their outcomes. They might have to move a little bit slower. What that means for us from the business perspective is, let's go find some more new customers so we can, build more future expansions and help more people build up their soil as an asset in the future. And so we're really kind of focusing on that, along with figuring out, where we can still help researchers at extension universities and those types of entities. How can we help them do more science to get more answers for farmers with less money? The traditional scientific equipment is really, really expensive. And we're a lot cheaper, and we can we can help a scientist with a smaller budget reach a lot more commercial growers at an extension. And that's an exciting thing too, working with those extensions and figuring out how to help them scale their research onto more acreage, even in a time of shrinking budgets.
Yeah, I'd assume outside of kind of like the traditional like grower customer, there's some opportunities to work more on like a B2B level, whether that's researchers and universities that are looking to quantify some of this, and then, companies that are selling cover crop seed or biologicals, what have you, as a way to do kind of some independent validation for what they're doing. Are you seeing good response on that side of the house?
We are. So I'll highlight another customer of ours, Great Crops, which is a research-focused grower in California. So they're doing a lot of contract research and other stuff like that. They really like our products because in addition to liking the data we provide and finding it critical, they like how, our service keeps things running. We have field techs who are in the area who can fix things when they go wrong. And so we've gotten, some nice feedback from them that we keep stuff running quickly, but also just that, we can work with all the crop types they're on: avocados, vegetables, wine grapes, that they, when they're doing work with a variety of inputs that are fostering soil health, they know that we're going to be able to work with those cropping systems and provide, high quality data. And I think that's really, really important as well. And so we're trying to find ways to work with more biologicals. I'm a big fan of biologicals across the spectrum, from like the whole synthetic biology, genetically modified spectrum to folks who go out and find like that one microbe growing in the middle of the outback in Australia that's the hardiest and provides the most value, the most boost to agriculture, and and they culture it and put it into the ground. So there's just a lot of fun ways we can work in that sector, and we'll continue to work with kind of the input supply chain as well.
Makes a ton of sense. Well, Adam, love what you're up to. Great insight. As we kind of wrap up, what is your ag hot take?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been looking forward to that part. I think the best hot take I have is that, any of these modeling tools we see in the agriculture space, like a modeling tool for emissions or just modeling in general, I think the impolite word for it is, I can't say on your podcast, the polite word is manure. Like the idea of modeling agricultural biological systems that we see in nature is just absurd to me. And the idea that you can kind of study it a little bit, sit in a lab and come up with some numbers in a spreadsheet and say, oh, that's what your farm's doing. This is your soil health. This is your carbon intensity. These are your nitrous oxide emissions. It's just crazy. You just can't measure something by doing hypotheticals on a computer. And if you're not going into the field and measuring, you just don't have any truth to work off of, and you can't make good decisions. So that's one right there. That's maybe more of a hot take for our scientific customers, because they tend to have a lot of overlap between modeling and measurement. And historically, they haven't been able to do as much measurement as they'd like, but we're changing the economics on that. The next hot take I have is that regenerative and industrial agriculture are oppositional. And there's a lot of glamour in regenerative agriculture right now. We have Hollywood movies coming out, which are super fun to watch. For the record, I think they can be beautiful, but they always portray this image of these kind of small scale farming doing beautiful work, and all that's very true. There's a lot of people in the country, and it's hard to reach the entire marketplace in that. And so we need to make regenerative agriculture. We need to make a little bit more industrial. We need to make industrial agriculture more regenerative. We can't say, these things are opposed. We need these systems to teach each other and scale, because without that, we're going to have trouble maintaining, food yields and delivering the environmental outcomes that I think we all want. And the last one, I think I touched on this already, that, all things synthetic biology and genetically modified is bad. I think there's a lot of opportunity to look at nature and find what's working and make, insignificant tweaks and go and, have improvements. And I think especially the environmental movement's extreme opposition to this is pretty damaging, because if you can create a microbe and you can test it and it's, pretty safe, and it produces fertilizer in the field without industrial emissions and saves farmers a ton of money, and also produces a lot less runoffs. Like, there's just so many advantages to that. And to say, oh, well, we just don't believe in it because it's genetically modified, that feels like, a fanatical approach, not a good down to earth common sense approach. And so I'd like to see, I think the great thing about the regenerative movement is that it's outcomes driven. We're there to say, like, we want an outcome, and we don't have to say, here's a list of rules and no rules. It's not going to be, like a cult or something like that, where if you don't believe everything, you're kicked out. And that's something I'm excited about the movement, and something that I know some people would probably have slightly different views on.
3 hot takes on one episode. We'll take it. Love those answers. Adam, this has been a ton of fun. As we wrap up, how can our listeners get in touch and connect with you and Agrology?
Yeah, so our website's a great place to start, www.agrology.ag. You can email me, adam@agrology.ag, and both of those are great ways to get in touch. I also want to call out, we have some webinars we run with a variety of people in the scientific and regenerative movements. I'd highly encourage people to check out our previous webinars and also come on there. We not only get to talk to a bunch of people who are doing really cool stuff in the field on their farms, we get a lot of really interesting scientists in who can talk about how, activities on farms connect to soil health or greenhouse gas emissions, where the world's going. And it's fun and interesting. And we get a lot of attendees, a lot of great questions and discussions. And if I had to pick a way to engage, that might be the first step I'd recommend, because you'll definitely learn something and maybe even have some fun along the way too.
So, Ty, what do you think?
I loved his hot take that regenerative ag needs to be more industrial and industrial ag needs to be more regenerative. I think it's so true. We need these groups to come together because, if we pigeonhole regenerative to this tiny, tiny, tiny scope or criteria, it's not going to make the impact we need to make. We're already seeing industrial kind of embrace regenerative, but now I think, again, it's about making sure that it's outcome based and that there is agreed upon methodology. So work to be done there, but I loved his perspective on that.
Hope you guys enjoyed the episode. We'll be back next week with another new one.